Welcome to the Commonwealth Matters. I'm your host, Richard Nelson with the Commonwealth Policy Center. So, should public schools introduce students to LGBT identity and promote homosexual behavior and transgender identity as a healthy lifestyle? And should schools insist that teachers use preferred gender pronouns of students and keep it a secret from parents? And the issue is no longer theoretical, since last summer, the Kentucky Department of Education issued LGBT guidance and a toolkit for Kentucky teachers. But what about the Christian teacher whose conscience is violated with such expectations? Joining me to talk further about this issue is Randy Adams, former administrator at Apex Academy, an alternative school in Woodford County. Welcome to the program, Randy.
Thank you, Richard, for having me. That's Anderson County, but that's okay. There's a lot of recent news going on in Woodford County as well. So this is happening everywhere. So it's easy to get those things crossed. But thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you. And thank you for that correction, too. There are other communities dealing with LGBT issues that are being promoted in the public schools. We're going to focus on Anderson County and in your experience. And Randy, just before the program, I was talking about reviewing that LGBT toolkit and guidance that Kentucky Department of Education sent out last July. It was July the 1st that it went out. And I forgot some of the things in there and how, for lack of a better term, how inflammatory really some of it was. And when I say inflammatory, I mean this, that if the average parent read this guidance, and if the average teacher, I would say, even read what they were suggesting, it would raise serious concerns and really a conflict when it comes to conscience rights, conflict as far as what the purpose of public schools are and what public schools should be teaching. I'm going to start with this, just the in the beginning of this guidance. Here's what it says. I'm going to read a little portion. It says considerations for building safe and supportive schools for LGBTQI plus students. LGBTQI students often face systemic and societal barriers to success. Schools can proactively work to support their LGBTQI students by taking simple steps to build a safe and supportive environment for them to learn and grow. This document provides guidance to schools seeking to establish a more inclusive learning environment. Randy, when you first read this guidance and when you read and came across what I just shared with you, what were your thoughts? What were you processing and thinking when that happened?
Yeah, thank you, Richard. When I first got this document, I want to first say how I got it. You know, as an educator for over a decade, I just want to show up to work and I want to help every single student that comes in the door. Doesn't matter if you agree with me politically, if you share my faith. I believe that schools should be a place where every student can come and learn to do math, to write, to learn the history of our country. That should be a right afforded to every student in public schools. And I never saw that document until I was at work one day and a colleague came and said, in a meeting yesterday, central office came and told us that we were to use these pronouns as students request and did not tell their parents. Well, that was a red flag to me. So I went, I verified that information from another person at the school who was in that meeting. And then I went directly to the source, not to you know, in a fit, but just to say, hey, I just want to make sure I understand what's going on. And the document that you were referring to was emailed to me from Central Office of Anderson County Schools. And so what you just read off, the introduction to that, Richard, I share those same sentiments. I do not want schools to exclude any student from being able to show up and learn. I would always train my staff at Apex and tell them, a wonderful team, by the way, with diverse viewpoints. We always work great together, but we would say, if the student wore a Joe Biden t-shirt or a Donald Trump t-shirt to school, we'd love them the same, regardless of our personal beliefs. And so the reality is that when you continue reading the rest of that document, which you'll dive into, what it advocates for is not just for inclusion, it advocates for other people to have to abandon their beliefs and to compel their speech in order to glorify a lifestyle that may not agree with. We know that true tolerance, you can agree to disagree. You can have totally different worldviews and still love and tolerate each other. And if we're giving that up in schools, then we're not really practicing what we preach.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So I'm curious, Randy, was there a problem with LGBT students being singled out and bullied in your school at Apex Academy?
Yeah. So the reality is that Apex Academy, we service all the virtual students coming out of the COVID era. Virtual was a new outlet. So we had about 25 students in person and another 200 or so online learning from home. When I was hired, we were just on the tail end of COVID. And in the second year, the year that I was suspended, our numbers virtual had dropped, but we still had quite a few. And so I just want to, first of all, say that bullying of any type is never okay. As an administrator, I always took that seriously,
Mhm.
just because you disagree with someone. But the reality is for that specific group, did we deal with bullying and harassment situations during my tenure at Apex or even my tenure at Bloomfield? Had those things come up and we had conversations, but not at a greater rate that I saw for other things, as far as, if a student, had other different interests as far as anything. And so I think that's the basis of the argument. Is this group targeted and persecuted more than others? I don't want anybody persecuted, period. But I do think that that's being blown out of proportion in some ways, as far as the pushback that these groups are having.
Yeah. I'm going to go dive in a little further into the LGBT guidance from the Kentucky Department of Education. And there's a portion in here talking about preferred pronouns of students. It says this: educators should seek to use the preferred names and pronouns of students should the student request it. The use of preferred names is not a new phenomenon, and children from a variety of backgrounds and identities choose to use a name other than the one listed on their birth certificate. For more information about this, and it refers them to use another to reference or look into other KDE guidance. But it goes on to say that I'm going to read a little further here. To begin, let's see. To begin, if a student requests a teacher to use a preferred name to refer them to, the student's request should be honored by the school. This has important ramifications for a student's ability to participate meaningfully in school and is trauma informed. Not exactly sure what that means. It goes on to say, though, that the students, at the student's request, the student is a person who's going to be most negatively impacted by not having their preference honored. Therefore, the student's wishes should take a primary role. I'm looking for the place where it says, do not tell. Okay, here it is. Efforts should be made to inform parents only with the student's consent. I'm going to read that again, and that's the part I was looking for. As far as teachers telling the student's parents about the preferred pronoun use in the classroom, it says again, efforts should be made to inform parents only with the student's consent. So you as an administrator and your peers at Apex Academy in Anderson County, we're being asked or advised, strongly encouraged to use the preferred pronouns of students. And then secondly, essentially not to tell parents to that the student was going by a pronoun other than their biological sex. Tell us a little bit more about that. When you received that understanding, how did you respond?
I responded by privately and quietly emailing an analysis of the document. So I went through this document that we're talking about, and I sent back some discussion points to some from central office and the superintendent. This was all privately on an email thread between us. And the thesis, I guess the main points was, as I read this, there's three groups that I was worried about being alienated. First, myself, as a Christian in public education, I never forced my beliefs on anybody else, but I wanted to protect, I can't call a man or a woman. I've already stated that publicly. I wanted to be able to protect my right to, honor my God, honor, God the Father in Jesus' name. And second was students themselves. If this is expected of staff, it's not that much of a leap to assume, well, if this is expected of me professionally, could a student have a disciplinary action brought against them if they refuse to use a pronoun or a different name with another, with a peer? And then last was parents. I'm looking to my left because I have that document pulled up, Richard, but just to add on a little bit, on page 2 of that, it says, here's some of the things it says. Parents are afforded wide latitude to determine the educational path of their children. But assuming there's no safety concerns, well, it's a question, who at the school evaluates if a child is in danger? Where does it say, we're worried this parent is going to beat this child if they found out this information, even though there's no history? Who determines at the school whether the parents are, good parents that are acting in the best behalf of their child, or if they have ill intentions? But it says, assuming there's no safety concern, if the school is unable to honor this request, refer to the student by one name and keep communications with its parents under the other name. So that's the intent. What this is encouraging, this came directly from Kentucky Department of Education. This was sent to me by Anderson County Central Office, is saying we need to keep the student's name and pronouns at school this, but when you're talking to the parents, you're using this. That is deception.
That's exactly, Randy, that's exactly the word that I thought. Have you ever been put in a situation as a teacher or administrator where you are told to deceive parents? And that's what you were being asked to do in that LGBT guidance.
Yeah, I mean, morally, ethically, in the past few months, in my letters that have been shared between me and the board attorney, talking about the ethics that we're to abide by, I think this from KDE is a violation of ethics for sure. It goes on to say this as well. It says, only with the student's consent can we inform parents.
Yeah.
Richard, it doesn't say an age level. It doesn't say, this only applies to high school or middle school. What we're saying is all children know best. When we're regards to something that is a social transition to a different gender, that is encouraged to lead to a physical transgender movement later on for them to have physical surgeries, but the student knows best. And it says these reasons are practical and legal. Well, here's the reasons that the document gives. First, parents will likely learn of the situation either through third parties or an inadvertent communication by the school. Oh, you're likely to mess up and accidentally convey this information to the parent, even though inadvertent. Second, parents may constitutionally attempt to remove their children from school or enroll their children in a private school or choose homeschooling that will not honor their child's gender identity. Parents in Anderson County still haven't seen this document. It was sent to me saying this is what we're following, but this right here says we have an agenda to hide these pronouns and these different names from parents, because if they find out, they might put them in a private school or homeschool them, and that's not going to be good for kids. The thing that was so alarming to me is the state is saying they know better than parents.
Yeah.
And this is very scary.
Randy, that's a very good point. Preceding what you just shared, it says in this guidance, it says, generally speaking, parents have rights to guide their children's education. I think at that point, whoever wrote this document and the Kentucky Department of Education, which needs to take ownership of this, has really undermined parents just in that parents have a fundamental right to guide their children's education. And as they go on to say, it's not an absolute right, and that's true, but they're really undermining the most influential group in this situation, and that's parents. They do have a fundamental right. Parents should be respected. Parents should be brought in to the discussion when their child is identifying as the opposite gender. And for a document to come out saying that teachers should essentially deceive the parents is, for lack of a better way of putting it, it's absolutely appalling. Randy, when I was in school, remember some very good lessons. I was blessed to have a lot of good teachers. But I remember at a
Same.
very young age, I think in first grade, one of my teachers was saying, honesty is the best policy. Always be honest. Always tell the truth. Don't deceive. All throughout my education, public school education, I had teachers that supported that. They taught us to tell the truth. And here we're seeing the opposite, where teachers are essentially told not to tell the truth, but to deceive parents. I want to go press into a more fundamental level on this, though. This whole transgender ideology, this idea that a boy who identifies as a girl can actually become a girl, and that other people should affirm that or support that, um, or the same with a girl who identifies as a boy, and may even go through hormone therapy or surgical procedures. Um, this whole idea that that's possible when you have a born male, born female, the idea that you can transfer or somehow transcend your biological sex, that's anti-science. That's anti reality. And I'm saying that not to be harmful or hurtful, but it's related to education because we go to school to learn. We have the scientific process. We have we learn about the sexes. We learn about biology, and it seems that that whole thing is thrown out the window. But then the second thing, Randy, is that we're told to throw morality out as well. Not just morality, but honesty, as we just mentioned, but then to affirm something that was once determined and identified as a psychological abnormality, gender dysphoria. We're told to go along with that. Do you see that same, what I'm getting to here, that the schools are being turned upside down and doing something that they shouldn't do in a number of ways?
Yeah, is it science or a social contagion that is leading to more children being influenced to make these decisions? I didn't want to be a part of that influence, and I would argue this. And I don't ever want to antagonize, because at the base of this is I want the freedom to live, and I want others to have the freedom to live. But we are talking about children, right? We
Yeah,
are talking about the issue of parents and school boards deciding what's best for children.
yeah,
And there comes disagreements where someone says, well, if Randy doesn't support a child transitioning, then he shouldn't have access to his own children. He shouldn't even be a parent. Well, let's think about this. I have two daughters and I have a wife. My faith teaches me to respect that women are unique, that they have functions that I do not have. I love and honor my daughters, and I love and honor my wife. Is it okay for me to look at this as a man pretending to be a woman and say, well, that's offensive? Well, you're really teetering, Randy, on going too far. But let me ask, if someone walked into a school board meeting or to school in blackface, and they said, I'm a white person, but I want to be African American, would we find that offensive? My argument is, where's the difference in that and the transgender movement? Is anybody on the Anderson County School Board, or Mr. Glass, who's the head of Kentucky Department of Education, are they going to say, yeah, we also support blackface? Because, from logically, how is it different than the transgender movement? So we have to ask these questions. Are we making these decisions because we're afraid to stand up for truth? And we have a lot of people who, agree with you and me, Richard, but they're just too afraid to say it. But I want to protect my children's right, not just my own, but when my children are adults, to not have to use preferred pronouns, to not have to do these things, because that's the slippery slope we're thinking about here is not only just today, but what's the future look like? We have to stop and think about what are the ramifications of people actually transitioning. If the school board is encouraging this, and we have somebody who graduates from Anderson County High School and 10 years later saying, I mutilated my genitals, I cannot have children, physically, my body doesn't function as the way I wish it could now, and I have regrets. Are these folks who are encouraging this and saying it's right, are they prepared, 10 years down the road, to be financially responsible for encouraging and influencing children to go down this path?
yeah, yeah. If you're just joining us, you're listening to the Commonwealth Matters. I'm Richard Nelson. here with Randy Adams, former administrator at Apex School in Anderson County. We're talking about the LGBT guidance from the Kentucky Department of Education and the real ramifications on teachers and administrators. We're going to take a break and we'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back to the program. Richard Nelson here with Randy Adams. Randy, we were just talking about the impact that promoting LGBT identity has on teachers and on students. And it used to be that teachers were a role model for teaching what's right and wrong. Teachers would correct students when they were veering off the path. There was a moral expectation of both teachers and students, but it seems that we've lost our moral compass. Not only that, but students, according to this LGBT guidance and toolkit, it seems that students have become the center of the universe when it comes to what's right and wrong, and that teachers are supposed to affirm that student out of fear of hurting them or hurting their educational capacity. How do you respond to that? And it's essentially saying that in a different way. I just kind of condensed it, but is that what you're seeing from this guidance as well, Randy?
Yeah, not only from this guidance, but so many other things that are happening in education. Richard, there's an awakening going on with teachers all around the state, all around the country, that there's just a lot of broken things that are part of the educational system. You kind of mentioned one earlier, and I know this is gonna, a lot of people might disagree with me, but you mentioned the word trauma informed.
Yeah.
To kind of put that in just layman's terms, it's the idea that children that experience bad things, they come to school and their misbehaviors because of those experiences. We should be extremely patient and gracious in allowing them to, grow into the school setting. Well, I believe with all of that in theory, like what I just stated, I believe completely. The problem is not just with this transgender and this gender ideation, is that we have kids coming to school and through trauma-informed practices, we allow them to traumatize other kids. The behavior getting worse at school, the drugs, the terrible language, the disrespect of teachers, those things are growing everywhere. And under the guise of, well, we're being trauma informed, we're giving them time. Other kids who are showing up to do the right things, they're having a bad experience. And so you kind of go to, well, we've made students the center of the universe. Yeah. We're running into a lot of trouble doing that, because with this policy, we've said, hey, ask the kid if we can call home and inform their parents your child wants to be identified by a different name and a different gender. We have to get a child's permission to do that. It begs without any evidence that the parents are bad parents. Well, it begs the question, what if the kid has a failing grade? Do we call the parents then? Or do we say, hey, we need your permission to call your parents and tell them you failed this test. You need tutoring, you need extra help. Yeah. We've blurred the lines, what you talked about, honesty and integrity, the school systems, the boards, all the way up to the state and the national level. We've gone away from that virtue of honesty, and we've traded it in for deception. And we've given up a lot of logical strongholds in the process of doing that.
Randy, you certainly took a stand against this policy. You allowed your Christian convictions to determine how you responded. You ended up leaving under pressure. Have you found other teachers standing with you, other administrators in your school system that are on your side? Because it seems to me that you're the only person that is standing against this policy and standing for your conscience rights and, quite frankly, for what is right. And if you don't want to answer that, I don't want to put, I'm not asking you to throw your colleagues under the bus at all, but you are the one that you've made statewide news and you have taken a stand. And as you pointed out earlier, I think you've done it in the right way. You had private conversations, you've shared your concerns in a reasonable way, and yet you were essentially forced out. Is that being too strong to say you were forced out? I know you resigned, but you didn't feel it, that it was, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Just maybe you should speak to that.
Sure, I will, Richard. When all of this happened, before I ever notified the community, I just want to assure everyone, and then it's not about saving face. If someone wants to dislike me for this, it's fine. But I definitely had conversations with the superintendent with central office before I ever made my Facebook post. Hours before, I called the superintendent personally on my cell phone, and I asked them, "You've put this guidance out there. It's already been emailed to all the high school staff. Can you temporarily rescind it so we can have conversations about this and outline the repercussions? And if you're not, before parents send their children to school tomorrow on Monday, we need to notify parents that this is what's happening. Parents do not deserve to have this hidden from them for 1 second."
Yeah.
And that's why I made the post when it was made clear that nobody was going to notify parents. You know, my faith is the most important thing to me. I'm unashamed of the gospel. Jesus died on the cross for my sins. I am a sinner. There's nothing self-righteous about me. I have nothing that I can boast in. God has done that for me.
Yeah.
I realize that God made a good creation, man and woman, and I cannot just hand this over. I have to make sure parents know. I have children that go to my church that I pastor that are being sent to these schools every day. And so when I made the decision to do this, Richard, I realized it could be lonely, not because other teachers don't agree with me, but we are in a situation where this is our livelihood. People are providing for their children. A lot of teachers have reached out to me privately and said, "We agree with you 100%. We stand with you." When they saw me not return to work and they saw me, in all the news media and these type of things, a lot of people got quiet. I'm not angry with anybody. And I just want to be honest. There are very liberal teachers on the opposite end of the political spectrum that I work with that are great teachers that would never want to hide information from parents, even if they agree with the LGBTQ movement and some of these things. There are people that I have a lot of respect for on both sides that I think deserve answers. And so to get to your last question, it's kind of lonely, but the church has shown up and supported me and prayed for me. And a lot of people that don't share my faith have supported me and reached out and said, "Yes, logically, we agree with you." But as far as being forced out, here are some of the things that took place. I was reprimanded for using my email for whenever they sent this guidance out to everybody. I just said, "Hey, I have some concerns. I'm going to be in talks with central office." I was reprimanded for using email to express a private opinion that didn't match the views of the school per se. And then before I returned to work, I was given something called a letter of expectations. I've never heard of a letter of expectations. In that letter, they said in the course of the investigation against me, they uncovered a lot of things that they were concerned about, that I had been rude to. And I'm going to be open and honest about this because I encourage anybody. The school board can share my evaluations. I give them permission to post them on their website if they would like. Before I brought this issue to attention and afterwards, before my evaluations were good, afterwards they tanked and said that I was rude to parents and students, that I had basically enticed students to anger and levied a lot of things against me without proof. And so when it was time to do my evaluation, I wrote on there I didn't agree, and I requested to have specifics. What parents specifically have complained about me? What students specifically, where are these issues coming from? And that list has never been given to me. I believe in due process, innocent until proven guilty. And if they can showcase where Randy Adams has done these things wrong, then so be it. I challenge them to do that. I'm not going to admit to something I haven't done wrong. I stood up to protect students. I stood up to protect parents. So I challenge that. So I resigned because if I don't have the support in an alternative school where, we have wonderful families, wonderful students. I love the students that I worked with. But the reality is we had a tough job. And if I have a student that gets angry and upset and I'm not fully supported and I'm hung out to dry, it's just not worth it to me anymore. So in a way, I resigned because I just had too much liability hanging over my head to go to work and risk that and to not have that support.
Yeah, Randy, I wish we had more time to hear your story. We need to close. Want to thank you for taking a stand. I want to thank you for informing parents in your district, and to encourage other teachers to do what's right. I've got a feeling this is not the end of the story. I don't think this is the end of LGBT guidance in our public schools. And Commonwealth Policy Center will talk more about it when these issues come up. Randy Adams, thank you so much for your time and joining us here. May God bless you.
God bless you.